Writing should flow, but what does that really mean? Well, we've covered the main ideas, so now let's see how it works. Hey there, many geological time periods ago, we talked about flow. It's something that writers and readers claim to want, but it's also something that people have a really hard time defining. So a reader might read something and say, it just doesn't really flow, and they'll really have no idea why. And then a writer will likely have little idea how to fix it because what even is flow? And I won't belabor it here because we've already done a whole series on different aspects of writing that contribute to flow, but the basic idea is this. Writing flows when it facilitates a reader's movement from one word and sentence to the next. And we can achieve that by making changes that reduce the amount of effort required for a reader to get through what we write. And that's something we can do on 3 different levels. On what I've called the semantic level, we can practice cohesion, coherence, and intuitive organization of our ideas. On the syntactic or grammatical level, we can work with subordination, modification, and transition. And on the phonetic level, we can pay attention to the sounds of letters, the rhythms of our sentences, and even things like contractions and pauses to manipulate how our writing sounds. So in today's show, we'll take a look at a couple of paragraphs from pieces that you've submitted and talk about how we might approach revising them for flow. Of course, before we begin, just a couple of important things. First, huge thanks to today's submitters and to all of you who have been sending in your work. I'm doing a more or less okay job of staying caught up on the submissions as they come in, and I'm excited to continue talking about your writing. So if you want to send in your writing, stories, poems, lab reports, or whatever, the link is in the description, and if it meets the needs of a video, it may just end up on the show. And second, flow is not a systems optimization problem. It's not just a simple process of taking a paragraph and applying all the tools to it and then walking away. When we're talking about flow, we're really getting into the territory of personal style. Some principles are more important than others, and there are a bajillion different ways to do this well. I'll show you how I might do it in order to give you some ideas about what you might do, but my suggestions are just that. They're possibilities, not corrections. And if you would do it differently, that's great. So with that, let's take a look at our first paragraph. This excerpt comes from a short essay about a speaker who found meaningful work in an arcade called Replay after 8 years of uninspiring employment elsewhere. We join our narrator right after the owner of the arcade breaks the sad news that Replay is going to have to close. We already have a pretty good setup here. We can see some cohesion. Old information comes before new information pretty regularly, with beginnings of sentences calling back to previous ones. Coherence-wise, the subjects of sentences are also pretty consistent. The writer here is also taking advantage of some good subordination and modification, and it has an easy conversational rhythm to it overall. But as with all things, there's room for refinement, and part of what we're doing is thinking about the organization of ideas and the ease with which readers can move from one idea to the next. So, just stepping back for a second, the first sentence shows Alex posing a question to the speaker. And then we get sentences that tell us that the speaker froze, just looked at Alex, and took an eternity to answer. Now, those are all different things, but they're also pretty much all the same thing. As a result, the flow of this paragraph might feel a little like getting caught in an eddy, circling the same basic idea a few times before you get to move on. So instead, we might try something like this. So now we get in 10 words what we had in 25, and of course we lost some in the process, but not that much. The next 2 sentences imply a connection that we could strengthen like this. Even just trading a period for a colon can help with flow, because a period tells us that there are 2 sentences here, while a colon tells us that the second clause is an explanation for the first. Readers don't have to stop and tread water while they figure out how the 2 sentences are connected. The colon tells them immediately that they are connected and how they're connected. And next, we get 3 sentences that have reasonable connections to each other, but they also have different subjects that aren't explicitly related. Each sentence seems to start a completely new idea. Also, the second sentence creates some room for confusion. What exactly does he understand, and what specifically does he not blame the speaker for? Flow and clarity can be closely related because confusion puts a full stop to flow. So finding a way to clarify something can go a long way to helping you with your own flow. And of course, there's 100 different ways to do it, but we could try something like this. I mean, you know me, always hungry for a dash, and I think this does give us a nice opportunity for one, to be honest. I did cut the first sentence, but I think we can catch the idea here in just a second. I also added a little bit to clarify Alex's response, and I took advantage of some subordination to get these two sentences flowing into each other with ease. Now, at this point, I actually think we have a good opportunity to break the flow by starting a new paragraph. We're moving from the immediate scene of that conversation to a larger reflection on the moment. What comes next is different enough that breaking the paragraph makes sense. It might be the difference between a reader getting caught in a current they aren't expecting and showing them a sign that they're going to go down a different fork in the river. Getting caught in an unexpected current is scary, but being guided down a new waterway is reassuring. Flow is good, but breaking flow can also be valuable. When you find yourself catching a different current, a clean break can help your readers to stay oriented. And here we have some pretty strong flow overall, but a little bit of eddying, or we could call it light whirlpooling, and at the same time some ideas that seem to pop up out of nowhere and could be introduced more smoothly. So our next chunk might look something like this. A little trimming, a little combining, an extra dash because dashes are the best, and because frankly a comma isn't quite strong enough to do the job here. Let's read through the original and the revised version and see what you think. After having a heart-to-heart conversation with Alex about what comes next, he asked me, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" This simple question froze me. I couldn't think of an answer. I just looked at him, ashamed. I replied after what felt like an eternity, probably making someone else money. As these words left my mouth, they hurt my soul. Yet again, I was picking comfort over what my soul wanted. I tried to rephrase that reply in many ways, but nothing felt authentic. Alex understood, though. He didn't blame me. But I couldn't accept that answer. My soul couldn't. For the next few weeks, I thought about that question over and over. I kept thinking of different ways to find my own destination, to escape from going back to the person I was a year ago. I remembered how I found replay by being mindful of my emotions. My emotions were trying to guide me again. When I answered the question Alex asked me, I had betrayed my soul. I decided then I was going to be authentic to my soul, my true self. Truth be told, I don't know where my destination will be next, but I know for sure that being mindful of my emotions will guide me through my journey. To be authentic to my soul is the way I want to live my life. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. After having a heart-to-heart conversation with Alex about what would come next, he asked me, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I froze for what felt like an eternity before confessing, probably making someone else money. My answer hurt my soul. Yet again, I was picking comfort over what my soul wanted. Even though Alex said he understood and didn't blame me for choosing a safe option, I couldn't accept the answer I had given. My soul couldn't. For the next few weeks, I kept thinking of different ways to find my own destination, to escape from going back to the person I was a year ago. Then I remembered how I found replay by being mindful of my emotions. My emotions were trying to guide me again. When I had answered Alex's question, I had betrayed my soul, so I decided that I was going to be authentic to my soul, my true self from then on. Truth be told, I don't know where my next destination will be, but I do know for sure that being mindful of my emotions will guide me through my journey. Following my emotions, being authentic to my soul, is the way I want to live my life because, in the end, it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. And again, this is only one possible way to do it. We could change fewer things or more things or different things. Whatever you might end up doing with your own writing, remember that the overall goal is to make the connections between ideas and sentences more explicit in order to smooth out those transitions and to eliminate needless repetitions and potential points of confusion so that your reader can keep flowing along without getting stuck. Of course, at the same time, you want to be mindful of points where you might want to disrupt the flow, whether that's to give your readers a chance to come up for air or to put more emphasis on an idea. For example, the truth be told transition near the end is a little abrupt, but I kept it in the revision because it sort of works to set off the final takeaway of the passage. It interrupts the flow in a way that might wake a reader up and get them to pay more attention to the writer's concluding remarks. Now, our second paragraph comes from a dissertation proposal about the influences and interpretive styles of two pianists from early 20th century Brazil. Of course, with a document like this, we're getting deep into the realm of academic writing with all of its eccentricities. Where the first excerpt we looked at was more personal, this one is more concerned with ideas. Their styles are very different because they're written for different contexts. As a result, our flow priorities are going to be a little different too. So it just wouldn't make sense, for example, to make this one as conversational as the last. That would surely get some skeptical harumphs from your committee. That said, most academic writing is critically flow deficient, so we can use this paragraph as a way to talk about some potential flow enhancers for academic prose. And here we have some good transitioning and introductory phrases already. As is common in academic writing, logical connections are fairly explicit. When you're telling a story or something, the risk and cost of misunderstanding is lower. If your sentences are all over the place, the strength of narrative time will still usually hold things together okay. But with the abstract conceptual work of academic writing, you do need to be extra careful. And I know that people often complain that academic writing is overly complex and hard to read, but it's also usually one of the more generous kinds of writing when it comes to explaining itself to readers. When you do know how it works, it gets much easier to read, even to skim, because it does so much to help readers out. Or at least it does when it's good academic writing. So of course, there are some good things going on here, but that's not going to stop us from making some adjustments. We didn't talk too much about coherence with the last one, but it's much more relevant here. See, where you're talking about denser stuff, keeping subjects consistent through a paragraph can do a lot to help a reader keep track of the main focus. And we do have some pretty consistent subjects in this one, but notice what they are. There, it, social, political, cultural, and economic realities, it, again, you get the idea. Many of these clauses start with subjects that pretty much tell us nothing about what the sentences are actually about. And like with the last one, I'll hasten to say that it's not that either of these writers have done something wrong, just that we can make some adjustments that will help readers out even more to experience a sense of flow and to have easy comprehension throughout. So job number one is to bring some more useful subjects to the surface. We might also look at sentence structure. So you might notice that a lot of this paragraph works through coordination. Ands and buts and periods prevail here, and coordination is perfectly respectable, but some subordination and modification could give us not only some additional insight into the writer's reasoning, but also a little fluid variety. And that might be one of the things I mean when I say that writing for flow is not a systems optimization problem. You can work your writing into perfectly glassy laminar flow, but as excited as some people might be about that, a little turbulence can do a lot to keep your readers engaged in your work. So we might also want to work on changing up the structure just a little bit more. First things first though, what is this paragraph even about? The current subjects of these sentences don't help us out much, but we can see that each sentence is really talking about musical interpretations, which makes that a great candidate for a replacement subject. Now, given the juggling act that academic writing tends to be, let's just do all the revisions at once and then we can talk through them. So, through the magic of television, here's a revision that I prepared earlier. Okay, what have we done? Generally, these sentences are saying what they need to say, but our first job was to make that more explicit by making the subjects of each sentence more uniform and more informative. That way, readers don't have to refigure out what each sentence is about. As soon as they hit the subject, they know we're talking about some variation on the theme of musical interpretations. Of course, that's a change that required some restructuring of sentences. The first sentence, for example, has been significantly changed in order to get our subject where we want it, but the meaning is largely preserved. The insertion of consequently helps to clarify a cause and effect relationship that's less explicit in the original, and it does some rhythmic work too. There's nothing wrong with the but the however is just a little nimbler and it softens what is still essentially a coordinate structure. The next two sentences combine pretty seamlessly, allowing us to flow through without having to reset with a new sentence. We could have the last sentence blended in too, but when academic sentences get long, clauses can blur into each other and comprehension can get harder, so we break here, let a reader take a breath, and then move into the final and most important claim of the paragraph, that building a fuller narrative will help to correct for a lack of scholarly interest in 20th century musical recordings. Of course, my use of we could be a big problem. Scientists love to pretend that their writing comes from disembodied third-person consciousness rather than from human agents. Scholars in the humanities tend to be less superstitious on that front, so personal pronouns are more common. And to my humanities-trained ear, the we is totally innocuous, but we could mess with the sentence in other ways to get rid of it if we really had to. I mean, if one really had to. But anyway, let's listen to them back to back and again, see what you think. In the world of historical recording research, there is a tendency to perceive neo-objective interpretations' apparent straightforwardness as a lack of expression, and to be much more interested and surprised by the highly inflected playing of late 19th century performers. But it is necessary to recognize the modernist aesthetic as revolutionary to its time, with interpretive behaviors that differed substantially in style and in values from those of their late Romantic counterparts. Furthermore, it is essential to view the history of interpretation as a cultural history that encompasses more than just musical practices. Social, political, cultural, and economic realities also play a crucial role in shaping interpretive traditions, and in order to build a narrative of musical interpretation, it is necessary to take into account all these interconnected factors as they manifested in different parts of the world. In the world of historical recording research, neo-objective interpretations are often regarded as straightforward and consequently lacking expression when compared to the highly inflected playing of late 19th century performers, which has generally enjoyed greater scholarly interest. However, these interpretive behaviors associated with the modernist aesthetic should be recognized as revolutionary for their time, differing substantially in style and values from those of their late Romantic counterparts. Furthermore, the historical changes in interpretations are representative of a cultural history that encompasses more than just musical practices, and that includes the social, political, cultural, and economic realities that have shaped interpretive traditions. So, in order to build a narrative of musical interpretations, we must account for the ways in which these interconnected influences have manifested themselves in different parts of the world. Granted, academic prose is academic prose, but you may have noticed some other clarifying changes that I made, like making parallel structure more explicit and repeating or adding contextual cues. You might also note that I softened the assertions throughout, putting a little bit of a hedging buffer on them, and that's probably more down to my idiosyncrasies than to what a writer should be doing. I may have mentioned it before, but I had one professor once call me an awfully polite writer, and then suggest that I could probably get away with more forceful claims, but what can you do? Of course, if we wanted to aim for broader comprehension and more conversational flow, while also betraying our academic purpose and probably losing the respect of our esteemed colleagues, we could go with something like this. Historical recording scholars tend to focus their research on the highly inflected musical interpretations of performers from the late 19th century, and to overlook later neo-objective performances, which they view as straightforward and lacking expression. However, those modernist interpretations are not expressionless but revolutionary, and we can better appreciate them when we understand how the style and values of modernist performers relate to the larger social, political, cultural, and economic realities of their time. For all you students of Flow out there, what do you think of that? Obviously, there are some significant changes that probably constitute a change in genre, but it just goes to show that there's more than one way to peel an orange or whatever, and a focus on easy comprehension and connected syntax can do a lot to make your writing more flowy and understandable, which is usually a good thing. But sometimes you'll be writing in a context where a more complex and detailed style is expected, if not required. So do what you can in the situation you're in, and honestly, that's really all anyone can ask. So, dear writers and viewers, that has been my electric lecture on the wonders of flow, or really, it's a demonstration of how you might rework your own writing with flow in mind. The earlier videos in this series will give you a more explicit explanation of the principles that guided these revisions, but when it comes to flow, your best friend will probably be your ear. I'll never get tired of saying it, but where possible, read your writing out loud to yourself. Read any writing out loud to yourself and practice internalizing the rhythms of language. You might learn that you prefer some patterns over others, and that's great. Minimizing confusion and clarifying connections are always going to help with flow, but other things will come down to your taste and sense of language. which is also why there are so many writers who write in so many different ways. That's part of what goes into finding your voice as a writer, to develop your own sense of how you work with and against the principles of effective writing. You'll notice that I handled these two paragraphs in different ways, and hopefully the final result was something at least a little flowier. As always, it's a balancing act. In a perfect world, you wouldn't have to make choices between optimal flow and optimal communication, but every virtue of writing is in tension with at least one other. You may think that some of my flow-motivated choices were too great a sacrifice, and that's okay. Or you may think I could have taken it even further, and that's okay too. For my part, my goal was to give you an idea of what you could do while also trying to preserve as much of the original writer's approach as possible. The goal was to refine their approach rather than replace it with my own. But at any rate, I'm really glad you joined me today and that you stuck around until the end. Everything I'm doing would be supremely silly if not for you all on the other side of the screen. Of course, don't forget to submit your writing to the show if you'd like a chance to have it featured. We all owe another big thanks to the brave writers who shared their work for our collective benefit today. I especially hope that they found this helpful, and I also appreciated the kind notes they appended to their submissions. That's definitely not a requirement, but it did make my day. And if you'd rather work with me one-on-one, whether it's an essay, a poem, a novella, or something else, the link to do that is in the description as well. I'm available to give you written comments on something you send me, or to meet over video to help you brainstorm ideas or work through a sticking point in your writing process. Whatever it is, I'm ready to help. As always though, the easiest and most fundamental way to support the show is just to watch, and maybe to comment something useful that's usually algorithmically valuable too. In any case though, thanks again, and we'll meet again in the next one.